Everyone remembers the Baltic M01 that was released. It was a micro rotor in a watch for selling for under $600. M01 design is back, but it's a little different this time. Now, Baltic did send this in for review. I don't have to send it back, but you guys have seen my reviews. I'm gonna tell you exactly how I feel regardless. Now, the watch has a lot of the things that made the M01 great, but it's a little different. The package and the presentation, I think, has been changed. Now, I think Baltic on the original M01 frankly spoiled us a little bit. You had applied Breguet numerals, you had this polished bezel, you had a watch in a great compact size with a lot of different dial variations with the micro rotor as an added benefit. And I think the micro rotor really is what pushed it over the top. If you looked at that watch, the original M01, its original aesthetic, you probably would say that watch looks great. It looks like it makes sense at the price it's at. But when they add that micro rotor as an additional like watch enthusiast thing, it makes us say, hey, that really makes sense now because it's got that added little thing that we like, that kind of trips our trigger of the engineering of having that tiny little rotor back in there so it doesn't obscure the rest of the movement and it keeps it pretty thin. Before we get into more of the differences, let's go over the specs in depth. So this is a 36mm watch, 44mm lug to lug, a 9.9mm thickness, 20mm lug width. It's got a Hesalite or plastic crystal on top. It's got a 42-hour power reserve. Water resistance is 30 meters, and it's powered by the Hangzhou Caliber 5000A micro rotor movement. Now, let me preface, I haven't owned the M01, but I have had hands-on with this chronograph by Baltic, and I see this as sort of a blend of the two. The dial layout is now printed with the same sector layout of the numerals, and the Breguet applied numerals that we had before that were polished are gone. The bezel is now brushed instead of polished, and the tops of the lugs are also brushed instead of polished. And all of those aesthetic changes, I think, changed this from what did seem like a very dressy look to a little bit more of a modern feel, I think. And that's, again, just my idea. So now what do I like about the watch? I love the size. I love the color of the dial, the salmon dial. I love the dressy nature. The strap itself is really nice in this Italian calf leather that they put on it. And the micro rotor addition that's put in the back here is, I think, great at this price point. It's something that's unique, it's something that's different. Now, you can find that in vintage watches that are out there. You don't necessarily have to get it in a modern package, but if you want a micro rotor in a modern package, this is an affordable option for you. What do I not like about this watch are some of the things I mentioned before in terms of comparing the two. See, this channel is more about my opinion rather than fact. So you don't have to take my opinion as gospel, but I think almost as though we've been spoiled by the original M01. You know, with those applied Breguet numerals that were polished, you had a different aesthetic. You had something that looked rich. You had something that looked really refined. And I think the drop of the applied indices for these printed ones loses that elegance that was so integral to the part of the first dial. And I think it shows us the power of what a dial can be for someone. You know, you still have the same exterior perimeter of minute track, you still have the same textured dial, the same location of the subdial, the same written Baltic, the same hands, but just the change of those indices really changes what this dial looks like and the general aesthetic that it gives. It's, you know, it seems like a small change, but it is kind of a big change overall. And the bezel change from polished to this brush, I think, has an extra part there that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, and that is the edge of the bezel here. Now, I know, because I own a manufacturing company, that it is cheaper to laser cut out sheet steel than it is to CNC route it. My assumption here is that that is why this has this rough edge, because here at the top of this bezel, there is a relatively sharp edge here, because there is no bevel, there is no fillet here where you should expect the bezel then to round down into the rest of the case. You don't have that. And so the first thing I noticed when I pulled this out was, one, that it was relatively light, and two, the fact that when I tried to wind the watch, I could feel the bezel running in a line against my finger. And that isn't necessarily the best feeling, I would say. This is a Zelos that I've also reviewed really recently. This has a bevel that you can see right there on the edge of the bezel. I don't know if you can see it in these shots, but because of that, when I rotate this crown, now this watch retails for $800 rather than $600, but when I rotate this crown, I can feel nothing, right? It's smooth against my finger and I don't notice a sharp edge dragging against my thumb as I wind it. And I feel like that's one of those things where you see the press images, it looks nice, but when you feel a watch, you get a different sense of it. And I think that bezel right there, if they could switch that out for a filleted or a beveled edge on future models, I think it would stand out or feel a little bit better. Even if they could change it now, I don't know if it's too late to do that. That's something that I would recommend for this current model line. In terms of the layout of the dial, as I've mentioned, I prefer the applied indices, but if you're looking for more of a modern aesthetic with the salmon dial and you're looking for a lot of what you saw in the old version, you just didn't like those numerals, well then this gives you that package. In general, I just don't see the exact same hyped level of value that I saw to the original M01, but again, that's personal preference. To note, I do love Baltic's watches, but I think this watch takes away from a lot of the allure for what I liked in the original M01 in that dial and in that bezel that made it such a great value. But what do you guys think? Till the next one, peace.